So, welcome everyone to today's webinar about Iran's social unrest and the future of the regime. Today, I have with me three distinguished speakers. Dr. Sina Azoudi, who's the director of the Middle East Studies Program at George Washington University. Ahmed Hashemi, who's the director of the Middle East and Central Asia Program at JPI. And Alex Vatanka, who is the founding director of the Iran program at the Middle East Institute. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me today. Much appreciated, and also on a short notice.
It's good to be with you, Oren.
So let me give a short kind of a intro background before we jump into the first question. We know that in December 28th, a group of merchants left the bazaar, started to protest. That single event quickly escalated into a nationwide wave of protests that comes after a long period of time of economic difficulties. We saw the devaluation of the currency. We saw the fact that the new budget that was passed was full of surprises that the public didn't like. And there was obviously also the issue with the war in Israel, leadership crisis, and so on and so on. So the background that we have here is that it's a country in crisis that is now facing a nationwide social unrest, but also violent unrest. In some cases, we see this specifically when it comes to the ethnic groups, and not only. So within this context, which I'm sure most of those who follow us are aware, within this context, we see a regime that is facing one of the most, if not the most difficult period in their existence. And that leads me to the first question, and we'll start with you, Sina. And that is, if you are now looking at the leadership and the decision that they have to make, what are those decisions? What are they facing? What kind of decisions? And if you can also elaborate and tell us a little bit about what is it that is stopping them or driving them to make those decisions?
Well, thank you, Oren, for arranging this. It's good to be with Alex and Ahmad and everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. Let me just very briefly mention something. The merchants who closed down their stores in December of 2025, I think we have to keep in mind that they were the merchants whose business was most vulnerable to currency fluctuations. These are the store owners at a kind of a upscale shopping center in Tehran in Mir Damad Street that sells cell phones, electronics, laptops, the ones that are being imported. And any fluctuation, rapid fluctuation in currency means that they cannot do business because one day your iPhone is, let's just say, $200. The next day they have to sell it at $500. So people are not going to buy it. That's why they started the protest from the get-go. But in terms of the decisions that the leadership is facing, I think, to put it very simply, the mindset is either we stay together or we will be hung separately once the regime falls. This is why you don't see any, at least from what I've seen, is that you don't see elite defection in the top brass of the political leadership. You do not see any major defections in the top brass of the Iranian armed forces, IRGC, or the law enforcement forces. Every once in a while, there's a clip of some, corporal or a private, giving, his allegiance to the crown prince or somebody else, or asking President Trump to come and strike Iran. But I believe those are not the decision makers. They're mostly the draftees, or perhaps you can see a junior officer in the armed forces. But again, the top brass, I think their mindset is that this is an existential threat. And I think that they also strongly believe that this is a foreign instigated plot, and they have to defeat it at all costs. This is why you're seeing an unprecedented number of casualties. We're now seeing 2,000 people, including security forces. I think that should be around 40 or 50, but just the casualties are extremely high, and the level of brutality is extremely high, even for the standards of the Islamic Republic.
So let me ask you, Ahmad, the same question with a little twist. We saw that the regime decided to take a more aggressive approach in the last few days. It started with the disconnect of the internet, basically the flow of information, making sure that Iran is in the dark. And then we saw a rapid increase in the numbers of casualties, obviously indicating that the level of violence has been more aggressive. Is this a decision by the regime by basically you saying this is a do or die, we're going to fight this in a very violent way, or they're going to compromise, or they're trying to stabilize? Where do you see that the regime is? What kind of decision are they making right now?
Thank you, Oren, for this opportunity. It's a privilege to be among you, Alex, and the other distinguished participants. Again, I would like to start with the significance of this round of protests. It is different compared to the previous ones, partly because what Sina just explained, and also we should take into consideration the scope, scale, and the frequency of protest movements in recent years. Let's say starting from 2017, 2018, all the way to 2026, and so this is very significant. And also one reason why it is significant is the participation of merchant class, the Bazaris, because Bazaris usually they are loyal to especially the higher echelon of the Bazar or merchant class. They are very loyal to the regime. They bankrolled the Islamic Republic revolution in 1979. So we see that even them now they are protesting. And also, if you add to this the Khamenei's advanced age and then the death tolls, which is uh, again according to different sources, there's unconfirmed reports that this can be all the way up to 5,000 or maybe less, maybe more, and crumbling economy and other different factors, including what Sina just mentioned, the control over currency. This is the most basic attribute of a functioning state. We see that even this is not working in current situation. And also, maybe one of the most important factors is the Trump factor. We don't know what he has in his mind, but his message that the locked and loaded message. This is something that it can be a game changer. We remember, for example, while Green Movement was happening, people were chanting Obama, Obama, Yaba, Una Obama, Obama. You are either with the regime or with us, and there was no a clear message from Obama administration. But now we don't have that issue, and Trump's unpredictability is making things very complicated. I think this is different than previous let's say revolutions or protest movements or riots, and we have to wait and see how the international community reacts to it. That's one factor that we need to wait and see.
And Alex, I want to maybe shift the question a little bit from the decision that the leadership have to make to maybe touch a little bit on the opposition, and touch there in terms of what are the decisions the opposition, and if you can touch a little bit, who are the opposition? We know there's the whole Shah side here, but what are the decisions that the opposition have to make when it comes to this situation? Are we likely to see a request for a reform? Are we likely to see a request for a regime toppling and a regime change? Where do we see the opposition in all of this? So the same question in terms of decisions, but moving from an actor that is the regime to the opposition.
Good morning, Orange. Good to be with you, with Sina and Ahmed and everyone else on the call. Look, in terms of the opposition, we can talk about Reza Pahlavi and the opposition in diaspora in a minute. I think it's really important not to lose sight of the fact that clearly a bulk of this regime that are still part of this regime or for whatever reason support this regime, let's say 10%, we can play with the numbers. There is no hard data to point to, but those of us who've been watching Iran for as long as we have, we know it's around the 10, 15% and max. Good chunk of that, it's not because they believe in the ideology anymore. Those days are long gone. It's because that's where the paycheck comes in. And it's because somebody hasn't come around to offer those people inside the regime a way out. And I think that's key. I agree with Sina that we've seen in the last couple of days a hardening of the consensus that the best thing to do for now is to kill their way out of this, with Masoud Pezeshkian marching up and down the other day, suggesting that yes, they do feel that they have their disagreements, but if this protest movement really takes hold, they're all doomed, they're all gone, they'll all be hanging sooner rather than later. That might have created a temporary consensus of sorts, but I want to take a step back. Everyone knows the system is rotten. Even people presumably in Ali Khamenei's inner circle, they recognize the system is rotten, something has to go. Even if they prevail this time around, the next round of protests are just around the corner. Nobody can question that because of the structural issues that the regime faces half a century after it came to power and has been unable to make reform of any sorts that are meaningful for so long because frankly, Ali Khamenei is not in the reform business. He thinks God is on his side. That's the stubborn man you have to keep in mind. But that stubborn man is 86, and that stubborn man one day will be gone. So the question for the opposition in diaspora inside, how can they, and if so, how can they come about with something that looks like a transition to post-Islamic Republic? Because this system is doomed, is gone, and it will die if not before Ali Khamenei's death, then certainly with Ali Khamenei. So the question now is, if these people, and they're all sort of proclaiming loyalty to Iran as it is, nobody wants to see Iran in civil war or split up. If that's what they believe, why can't they sit down and talk? That's their challenge. That's the challenge inside of Iran and in the opposition. So if they can do that, Reza Pahlavi is the most prominent name. He's offering himself. A lot of people have questions about whether Reza Pahlavi can do it, but he certainly put himself out there. And frankly, without taking sides, I'm not in the policy advocacy business, but I can't see any of the names that are offering themselves. But what Reza Pahlavi needs to do first, very quickly, because time is of essence, he needs to get everyone that he can to side with him. You can be cynical on that, say, well, how come he hasn't done it for the last many decades? Why is he going to be able to do it in a short few days? Well, the reality is we've never seen this regime go out there, kill thousands of its own people. So it's an opportunity here and a unique moment that might actually result in unique solutions and compromises if there's a will to do it. But what Reza Pahlavi needs to do very quickly, and that's where he needs help, is to link up with folks in Iran who I said are on the fence. It could be anyone like, I don't know, people in prison, Tajzadehs of this world. And I know this is hard because vast majority of Iranians have this idea that we can go from the Islamic Republic to something very different, secular, democratic overnight, and we can just forget about everything that has happened the last 46 years, 7 years, and the people in it. That's wishful thinking. We need to find a moment of transition. Transition requires a buy-in from people inside the regime. You need defectors. You need people to come in. They don't need to necessarily lead. They can rally around whoever. It's Reza Pahlavi, someone else. That's what they need to do. How do you bring defections about? What we do know, last point, Oren, the United States, Israel, others have a lot more intelligence capabilities in Iran than they let us know. Can they use those intelligence capabilities for more than just pinpointing places to strike? That's one way to use your intelligence. Another way to use your intelligence is turn people around, make them play part of a game for the sake of an Iran that hopefully doesn't, descend into civil war the way things are going right now. So again, I threw a lot out there, but I just wanted to say the opposition right now might seem like it's in survival mode, might be willing to kill its way out of it, and it might do it in the short term, but surely in the long term, they know time is up and they're looking for a way out. Who can give them an exit strategy off ramp? That's key in many ways.
And you said the opposite. You mean the regime? The regime knows that their time is up. That's what you mean.
The players inside the regime below Khamenei
Okay.
who don't want to go down with him in this sinking ship.
Sina, you raised your hand, and I actually want to touch it with another point in another question. Alex mentioned the Ayatollah and his age, and I remember we had a webinar just a few months ago, and we discussed this in length about that there is a political standoff, man-made, so to speak, by the Ayatollah, not choosing to go with or not choosing to go against the nuclear program, kind of getting the camps fighting against each other because it serves him. The indecision serves him to maintain his power. And it seems like it backfired because not going this way or that way left a vacuum for those protests to come in. So your comment on that, one, and two, you had your own, you raised the hand, you had a comment to say. So maybe start with that comment.
Yeah, I'm listening to Alex. I agree with everything that he says. Connecting with the people in Iran during the transition period is, I think, critical. Alex mentioned Tajzadeh. I think he's a figure. He's already defected. He has opposed Ayatollah Khamenei publicly, and he's in jail for it. But I do want to mention the Crown Prince, and I say this as someone who initially and originally supported him wholeheartedly. My family were, royalists. I thought he would be a great candidate. I believed in the words that he said about democracy, but I believe that in the past few years, he has said many things, and some of his behavior have raised a lot of eyebrows in Iran. The comments that some of his associates have made about purging the so-called, what they called it, the reformists from the media. Just last night, he was on CBS, and sitting in the U.S., he refused to take any responsibility for the defenseless people that are being killed by the Islamic Republic, and he just said, "This is war." I mean, in my, I'm a huge fan of military history. I don't remember a military commander sitting in comfort 8,000 miles away, 10,000 kilometers away, and leading his troops to war. Again, I don't think, as someone who supported him, and I thought he would be a great fit for the future of Iran and democracy in the country, I think he has lost that legitimacy. And I believe, again, his father, may he rest in peace. I think he was a great king. I think that if he was alive today, he would not have approved of the actions of his son. So that's the comment that I wanted to make.
So let me stop you on that one, just because the topic of the the idea of the opposition here, it's such an important topic, and I think that's a topic I want to stay on for a second. And Alex, I want to go back to you for a second on that. How much support, and this is also a question from the crowd, how much support does the crown prince, the Shah son, really has in Iran? I mean, at the end of the day, these are massive groups that are going into the streets, and they are composed of anything from women's rights organization, union laborers, Kurds. I think, I mean, such a diverse group, but they're all basically say what we are all agreeing, that this regime has structural issues that they cannot be fixed. This regime needs to be replaced. That doesn't mean necessarily they will bring in the former Shah regime as a replacement, and that raised the question: so who else is there that can take over? I mean, is there an opposition, like a structural opposition? Because it seems that it's lacking in the current discussion, in the current situation.
Well, so, let me start by. Oh, sorry, Alex, go ahead.
Sorry,
or is it me?
Oren, if that question was for me, and stop me if it wasn't, and sorry, Sina, I'll be quick. Look, you want the most structured opposition in the Iranian sort of political atmosphere out there in Iran or outside? The Mujahideen Khalq, the MEK, is the most structured, it's the most organized. But he's lucky if he get 1-2% of support in Iran. This is a political legacy of the 1960s, 70s, the Cold War era. An entity that is fusing Islamism and Marxism. Their women still walk around in veil at a time when Iranian women are burning their veil. So just because you're structured doesn't mean you're going to capture the hearts and minds of the vast majority of young Iranians today, 70% plus probably weren't even born in 1979. So structured, and because you have access to US Congress and you have deep pockets, doesn't mean you're going to capture people's attention in Iran. I see, as I said, I don't want to pick a fight with MEK. They're probably going to be upset at me saying this. But the fact is, they are not, creating kind of joy and hope and warming people's hearts in Iran. Certainly, that's not my impression. Reza Pahlavi has something that is maybe in some ways the opposite. It's not structured. He thrives on the fact that there is nostalgia. Look, the Pahlavi dynasty, from when his granddad took over 1921 till he formally became king in 1925, and his father was toppled in 1979. That's whatever number of years is less than about 80 years, 70 years. That's put those 7 years, what Iran experienced as a country, next to what the Islamic Republic has done in 46 years. What the Pahlavi dynasty did versus what the Islamic Republic has done to Iran. A country that should be a top 20 economy is begging the Chinese to buy its crude oil when all the rest of the neighborhood is investing in the technologies of the future, such as AI and so forth. That's what the Iranians are looking at. That's where, he might not have a structured program, but he brings that sense that, yes, his father was certainly not a Democrat, and certainly not everything was fine under the Shah. He was in many ways an absolute monarch, did as he wished. But there was still a lot good going on under him and his grandfather as a Khan. That, I think, is really powerful. So when you're hearing these people across Iran shouting Reza Shah, his name, it's not because they're hoping for something or have seen something very specific from the man or his team, because frankly, that's been lacking. I mean, the Pahlavi machinery really needs a lot of help. He has his name recognition. People like him as a person, but his advisors, a lot of question marks. So he could have done a lot better. But that's beside the point. As I said earlier, thousands of people being killed by the Islamic Republic in the name that these protesters are all a Mossad fabrication. Look, I'm sure Mossad is involved one way or another, but we shouldn't forget that the protesters are essentially deep-rooted, a reflection of failed policies of an Islamic system that from day one said, it's my way or the highway. And for a long time, people said, we'll live with it. But as the regime has been less and less able to deliver the basics of services, essentially you're seeing people in the streets. And, Reza Pahlavi comes around. He's 65 years old. He's got the pedigree. People identify his name. Is he perfect? Absolutely not. Is there anybody else that can maybe get people rally around the flag at this critical moment? Because look, there is no time to have a committee of 15 people to sit down and think for months for a constitution. Action needs to be taken now, and that's what people want before more die. And frankly, this is a huge leap of faith. You are taking a risk. But the question is, how bad can it be when you are literally having this regime machine gun its own people? Now, how bad can Reza Pahlavi really be? Anyway, let me stop there.
Thank you, Alex. Ahmed, I want to touch on a question with you, and it relates to what we've been discussing. So it's obvious that the regime is facing, as we mentioned, not only structural issues that have been deteriorating over the years, and I think the water crisis is a perfect example just to show how bad it was in terms of bad management, bad leadership, and so on. But obviously, the snapback sanctions were crucial, combined with this perfect storm of low oil prices that makes smuggling of oil much less profitable than before, and so on and so on. So it's an economic crisis. It's a leadership crisis. We touched about that, the age of the leader, the fact that there are different camps within it. And yet, the regime survives. The regime is acting swiftly and strongly against the demonstration, brutally. And the opposition is a little bit scattered to the fact that we are looking into one person as a symbol, like Alex mentioned, and we haven't seen grassroots yet develop something, which means the oppression is very strong. So from that perspective, looking forward, are we going to see a regime that is willing to compromise to those demonstrations? I.e., are they going to open up and say, let's go USSR style and get some changes in the way things are being done? Or are we going to go see a North Korean style regime? they're going to go more harsh. Where do you see this is going from your perspective?
This is a $1 billion question, Oren. But if you allow me, let me touch on what was already discussed by Alex and Sina from my perspective. The issue of who is going to lead this movement and to lead the transition period is very, very important. So one issue that we have, Oren, is that the most of the Iranian American or Iranian European, for that matter, think tankers are either Persian or Persianized Iranians who identify themselves Persian, Iranian first, and then let's say whatever, Baluchi, Kurdish, or Ahwazi Arab, and the rest. So their perspective is monolithic. They repeat the same perspective, and then the Western audience or the Western experts, Iran experts, they repeat the same talking points. They parrot the same talking point. But the problem is that Iran is half Persian, and then the rest is non-Persian. I am an Azerbaijani. So a lot of Azerbaijanis, when you talk to them, they say, I am Azerbaijani first, or they prefer to call themselves South Azerbaijani, and then Iranian or whatever. So this is very important because, as you and the panelists rightly mentioned, Reza Pahlavi nowadays, his name is very highlighted, is pronounced, but when you, I'm glad that Oren, you brought a non-Persian to this panel, because usually they don't get a chance to talk. If you look at the DC think tanks, there's almost never almost never see a Kurdish Iranian or a Azerbaijani or Arab and Baluchi, and they are part and parcel of this country, but they never get a chance to talk. So why the Reza Pahlavi is an issue is that Reza Pahlavi has no base in those outside Persian heartland and those ethnic areas. They despise him to an extent that they rather be on the side of the Islamic Republic. I have a tiny group of let's say Azerbaijanis in diaspora. I talk to them. All of them, they say, yes, if we have to pick a side, then we will be on the side of the regime. It's despite the fact that this is terrible. This is a terrible two worst option choices to make. But they will, because Reza Pahlavi or the Pahlavi dynasty, the Pahlavi dictatorship for them equals slaughtering the minorities, whether that's Azerbaijanis, whether that's the Kurds, the Arabs. So that's why, again, you or one of the audience, someone in the audience asked how popular he is. If you're talking about the diaspora in Los Angeles, they call the Iranian part of Los Angeles, Iranian dominant region, Tehrangeles. He is 90%. He will get the votes. Or if we're talking about the Persian heartland. Again, he's popular. He will get maybe 30%, 40%, less or more. But if we drive a couple, like 100, 200 miles away from Tehran, go to the ethnic heartland, no, I don't want to say zero popularity, but almost no. He's a despised person. So that's why he is not a part of the solution. Maybe
sorry to interrupt you. Just to touch on the point from before, because we covered the Shah. I think what I wanted to ask you was more about in terms of the regime, how they view their potential going towards a reform. Do you think, and I think it kind of connects to what you're saying. I mean, there is a trouble and there's a difficulty with the fact that there's no structured, well-founded, a unifying opposition. And I think that's one of the clear messages we get from this discussion, that the opposition is well scattered. And it's the Shah is kind of playing the card of the brand name that can unify, but maybe as a transitional figure, not for a long period of time. We'll see about that. But the question here is, we are heading towards a situation where we are in a regime that is in a crisis, a fundamental crisis. Do you see them actually being able, reaching out to those protesters without having a structural person to go to and initiate reforms USSR style that will be structural, because unless this is just going to repeat itself, or they're going to choose the North Korean, because it looks like they chose the North Korean option, which is a very aggressive shutdown of the protest. So where do you see this is going? More towards the oppression, North Korean style, or more towards the a regime making concessions, kind of a USSR, those 1989 moment that in the USSR.
So this is going to be, of course, highly speculative. Nobody knows the exact answer, but I believe we have four scenarios, four potential possible scenarios ahead of us. Number one, continued repression, the current situation with while the regime grows weaker and weaker, and a limited agreement with the current administration in the U.S., with the Trump administration. This is, I think, very likely, even though this means paralyzed political structure, paralyzed or deeper economic issues. The second scenario, this is very likely, the first one, but second scenario, the regime collapse, I see it very unlikely because we can discuss it later. There's no preconditions, prerequisites for the regime change in Iran currently, despite the fact that this is one of the, or maybe the most severe political crisis for the regime, the most violent, the deadliest. So this is very unlikely, the regime collapse. The third scenario is which I think again is likely, is the transition to IRGC rule, or kind of a quasi coup. This is something, considering Khamenei's advanced age, considering he might die, he might be removed, a soft kind of coup can happen, and a mounting pressure on him. So the IRGC taking the upper hand, if it's not already in that situation, is again likely. And then the last one, again, likely but not highly likely, like the other option that I mentioned, the continued repression with a weaker central structure. This scenario is a fractured and failed state, a civil war situation. This is not very likely, but likely in coming months and years. This can be a situation depending on how the things develop in Iran, how things advance, and how the international community, especially the United States, the Trump administration, with its unpredictability, reacts to this situation.
Sina, just if I can ask for your assessment and shortly. So we kind of have we kind of covered a few options here. We kind of covered a lot of topics. There's a lot to be covered. But when you look right now into the situation, how weak is the regime right now? Is it really, because we are making the assessment, what I'm getting out of here is that the regime is not as weak as we might perceive it to be. It's actually much more stronger, and there's a lot of more tools in the bag to use in terms of oppression. So how weak is the regime right now? And also keep in mind that this might be the first event, but the structural issues that Alex mentioned before, they're still there and consistent, and only going to get worse as time passes. So how weak is the regime now, and how weaker it's going to be, and how aware of their weakness are they?
Well, I think that they are bruised with a bloody nose, but I think they're still in the fight, both internally and externally. Externally, we saw what happened in June of 2025. They didn't lose the war, but they certainly didn't win the war. Now, internally, I think they're facing multitude of crises at the same time. You have the crisis of legitimacy. We already discussed this. Alex mentioned 10 to 15%, the highest, I would say 20%. But that, let's say 10% to 20% is very loyal to the regime. They think that the Islamic Republic is the only Shia kingdom in the world that needs to be protected. Khamenei has a divine right to rule. And so they're very loyal to the regime. But ironically, they're also suffering from the economic situation in Iran. They're also suffering from other crises that the Islamic Republic is facing, that is energy crisis. When I was growing up in Iran, this is 1980s, blackouts were routine. Every week we knew that there's a night or two that we're not going to have electricity. By mid 1990s, that was a gone issue. It was in the past. We didn't have blackouts anymore. And one would think that in 21st century, Iran with a uranium enrichment capacity would not have to deal with this, but it is. People are facing, weekly blackouts. You have the water crisis we discussed a few months ago. So there are many crises that the Islamic Republic is facing. It is certainly weakened compared to, let's say, 2019 or 2020, but are they out of the ring? Have they been knocked out? The answer is no. And because of the crises that they're facing, the crisis of legitimacy, they are increasingly resorting to the iron fist approach to stay in power.
Sorry, I was on mute there. Alex, I wanna touch the next topic with you. So we understand that we have a regime that is with his back against the wall, using a more and more increasing aggressive, brutal iron fist, as Sina put it. But I want to touch something that Ahmed mentioned, which is something that I noticed. The regime is using the narrative of we don't want another Syria happening in Iran. The idea of that if we're going to let the protests to take over, what we're going to see is essentially Iran kind of fragmented into based on ethnic line and so on, Kurds, Azerbaijan, and so on and so on. How much is that narrative actually stand ground? How much is that narrative actually helps the regime, and what other kind of approaches the regime is trying to promote out there in order to make themselves as the only valuable solution and alternative? May not be the best, but the only one that is there that is capable of making Iran still a unified national state.
Oren, thank you. Listen, I wanted to sort of also respond to Ahmed and sort of try and answer your question along the same lines. Look, I usually stay away from the issue of ethnicity because I feel like when you haven't lived in Iran as long as I haven't, but I would say I'm pretty familiar with what's going on. I would just, point out that Iran is this is not some product of colonial engineering. These borders you see are historical borders of a country that has a civilization going back 5,000 years. A lot of different ethnic groups and religious groups live in Iran. I mean, some of the earliest Christian churches in the world are in Iran. Jews have lived in Iran for 2,700 years, and there are a long list of ethnic groups. Ahmed was talking about the Azeris, and I was sort of struggling to, the depiction of Azeris being a separate nation in Iran. I have a hard time following that. I'm half Azeri. Khamenei is half Azeri. Reza Pahlavi is half Azeri. Half of Iran is half Azeri. Azeris have been part of the Iranian nation, have in fact been among the ruling elite for centuries. It's like the Azeris would joke, there will be no Iran without Iranian Azerbaijan. They don't necessarily looking to separate from Iran. And by the way, which raises the issue, separate to what? Are they going to join the Republic of Azerbaijan to the north? Do we really think President Aliyev wants to be the leader of South Azerbaijan with all the things that will bring with it? So just a few minutes ago, we were talking about having a structure. Where is this structure? Where is the pathway for a separatist Iranian Azerbaijan or Kurdistan or Baluchistan or Khuzestan? They don't exist. And we're playing the game of the regime. The regime, to your point, Oren, will say, this is part of a foreign plot. The Israelis, the Americans, the British, somebody's paying these people to come out there. And by the way, I'm not talking about Ahmed here. I'm talking about people who are out there talking about independence for these regions. They're saying, They're playing the game of foreign powers. The plot is to dismantle Iran, to make Iran into what they call Iranistan, a number of little stands that will no longer be a threat. And that's what the regime narrative is all about. The regime narrative is that we are the only ones who can keep the beloved Iran intact, which ironically put him in the same camp as Reza Pahlavi. But Reza Pahlavi's of the opposition are saying the reason why we're at the risk of maybe seeing Iran break apart is because of your policies. It's because instead of focusing on Iranians in Azerbaijan or in Khuzestan or impoverished Baluchistan, you're spending money on the Shia of South Lebanon. That's where the problem is. Iranians have lived together for centuries. The problem, yes, I agree with Ahmed, too much power in the central government. And that's true going back to the Pahlavi days. There needs to be more power, respect for their language rights, as the Azeris, the Kurds. There are a lot of things you can do in terms of reforming how minorities in Iran are respected, treated equally. And the Persian domination certainly is a factor that needs to be tackled. And the Shia domination, certainly, even a bigger issue, needs to be tackled. Just ask the 10% of Iran Sunnis. They have all sorts of issues with the system. Those are all true. But the question is, do you reform gradually, or do you go for this, break up Iran and then let's hope for the best? Again, that is exactly the regime narrative, that you end up with Syria situation. You end up with Libya or Yemen situation. There will be foreign actors that bring money and arms to the country, and Iranians would spend the next 20, 30 years killing each other when there is a much easier path towards reform that serves everyone's interest in the country. Again, I think it's a really slippery slope. We have to be very careful when we talk about ethnic politics in Iran. It's the one that if we don't get right, the regime will benefit from, because vast majority of Iranians, in my view, have issues with the government for sure. But there's a sense that they're all Iranians. Ahmed is right. Just about 50% are Persian. The rest are not. But they're also Iranians, and they have been Iranians for centuries. And I think that counts for a lot, because it can be part of the solution instead of making problems worse.
So I want to take on that point and build on another kind of a thing we're noticing, and that is something that we feel is misunderstood or not being explicitly said. Iran is not, as you said before, it's not a colonial power that came and drew lines on the map. Iran is, well, the Farsi Empire was there for thousands of years. The history of Iran, the history of its people, and so on. This is a nation state that is built on very strong fundamentals. And that leads me to the question. We kind of see the Iranian regime as if it doesn't have strong institutions, if it's built as if you just touch a little bit and it will fall, because we saw that in other regimes such as the one with Gaddafi or Bashar al-Assad and so on. But we're missing a little bit the point that the regime that we see today has a lot of institutions incorporated into Iran's way of life. Can you a little bit explain to me what makes this so different from the Arab Spring kind of a case? That this is not an Arab Spring kind of a case. This is a more institutionalized regime, a more involved into the people's day-to-day life. So that's not going to be a one push and it's over, but something that's much more difficult to achieve if you want to replace it.
I'll be very quick, Oren, because I'd love to hear what Sina and Ahmed have to say about this. But look, I going back to a point we talked about earlier, the regime, by and large, knows itself it's rotten. I mean, those of us who are Iran watchers, spend hours every day listening to their own discussions in Iran when internet was still up and running. They know exactly what's wrong in Iran far better than we do outside. So the question is, do you find a way to give them a way out? Because they fear civil war. They fear Syria scenario or Libya scenario. And that's the challenge. Because the institutions, you're right, they've been there for centuries. There's this Iranian character has a track record going back centuries. And that matters. But you still have to, give those people inside the regime a hope that they won't end up having to look for sanctuary in Tajikistan or Afghanistan, that there might be a future for them in Iran. Because unlike the last time we had revolution, these people associated with this regime can move to California. They don't have that option. So really their lives are at stake. And that's why we need to be very creative. That's why you need to give them a way out. In terms of last comment I make on this, the two institutions that we shouldn't confuse with the long history of the Persian Empire, because they're entirely manufactured and relatively new. One is the office of the supreme leader. There is no such a concept in Iranian history. There is no precedent for it. There's no accommodation for it in Islam. It's man-made. The mullahs made it in the 70s. It can disappear with Ali Khamenei. Nobody's going to miss it. And that's important. So supreme leader and this whole idea of having a supreme leader, that in fact, as Hassan Rouhani and others inside the regime are saying, maybe they should have a referendum, get rid of it, because it really hasn't worked out. It's been an obstacle for good governance. And by the way, ask Masoud Pezeshkian, and he'll tell you exactly that. The other entity that is man-made and does not really have long track record, and few will miss it, which something touched on earlier, is the Islamic Revolution Guards Corps. IRGC was made in March of 1979. It might have had a claim to be heroes of the nation when they fought Saddam Hussein, but today they are in the business of killing Iranians. And I think a vast majority of those people wearing the uniform who thought they got the job because the perks are great, today are wondering, do I really want to have this uniform on when this ship sinks? So again, you got to look for not the top hierarchy, because they got blood on their hands, but of the 170, 80, 90,000 members of IRGC, I assume bulk of them joined because that was a career. Get them off. Give them a reason out of this. Give them jobs that are elsewhere. Again, not easy things to say, but I fundamentally, and this is where I disagree slightly with my friend Sina, I don't think even if 20%, let's say the 10 to 20%, vast majority of people who are supporters of the regime don't think Khamenei deserves a Shia kingdom, don't think Sayyid Ali really is God's chosen man. They know how he got the job back in 1989. They know Rafsanjani gave him the job. There's nothing special about Khamenei. And I think that cynicism isn't just me. I think vast majority of the supporters of the regime get that. They don't support him because they think he deserves the job or he's doing a good job at it. They just don't have an alternative. And that's, again, back to the challenge for the opposition in diaspora, opposition in Iran and countries like the United States. Can you find a way to give these people a way out so we don't end up in an Iraq situation where, we end up creating enemies that we could have otherwise co-opted for the sake of an orderly transition going to Islamic Republic to something hopefully much better.
Thank you very much, Sina. I'm sure you have some comments to say, so let's start with the commentary you have, and then I want to ask you a question about the IRGC. So go ahead.
Sure. Look, just on what Alex was saying, I also have Azeri background. I think Azeris identify as Iranians. My grandmother's last name was Azeri. It was literally Azeri, was from Tabriz. So she and I, we always identify as Iranians. But I will say one thing about the institutions, and that's where I think Alex and I have different approaches on this. I think the position of the Supreme Leader or Wali Faqih are not that different from the institutions of the Persian court. And I know this is controversial, but looking at history, when you look at the titles of the Persian kings, who always carried the title of the scepter of God or shadow of God on earth, even the constitution that gave legitimacy to the Pahlavi dynasty, to the Qajar dynasty, specifically says that a kingdom is a God-given gift. So my point is, whether you're talking about the Sasanian kings who had the scepter of God and had a divine right to rule to all the way to the Pahlavi dynasty, or Khamenei, all of them claim legitimacy and divine right and not responsible to the people. So in a democracy, you would say that the leadership is responsible to the people, but none of them, at no point in Persian history, you will see, even under the Islamic Republic, that the king at the top has ever been responsible to its own citizens. In the case of Khamenei, look, I sometimes make the joke that Iranians replaced Mohammad Reza Shah with Sayyid Ali Shah. I think he's just another king using the same divine right to rule. He's not ever responsible to the people. He always takes himself out of the equation in terms of taking responsibility or accountability. That's exactly what the Shah did in 1970s, and that's why when it came to 1978, people were saying we want everything but the Shah. They didn't care in 1978 what will become after the Shah. They said it's not going to get worse than this. And that's exactly what we're facing now, that people are saying it's not going to get worse than the mullahs. We just want them gone. But history teaches us otherwise, unfortunately.
And that's the point I want to touch about the IRGC.
Mhm.
Is it possible to say that this situation is essentially one that beneficial for the IRGC in the sense that this gives the crisis point for them to really take over leadership, to really make sure that they are the predominant power in Iran, and allow themselves to basically take over Iran completely, using the crisis as an opportunity in a sense. Do you think that we're looking into that potential scenario might happen and maybe this is part of the interest that we see behind the scenes of why some of those protests were not contested so far
Mhm.
so strongly in the beginning of it? Maybe there was an interest to actually see them kind of ruling out because we are in a political situation where we see reformists, where we see a leader that is ill and sick, and we have a successional battle that it haven't been decided. The RGC may come in and say, you know what, this is our time to take over.
This is an area that Alex has given a lot of more thought than I have, but absolutely, I think it is very possible a scenario like Pakistan or Egypt, when you have a strongman leadership, a military figure leading the country. Now, they might decide that to keep the position of the supreme leader, but they'll be running the show. And I think you and I have discussed this before. But I will not be surprised that at some point when Khamenei leaves the scene, he dies, IRGC decides that this is the moment for a hostile takeover of the country. Now, I'm not saying that there will be tanks and APCs on the streets of Tehran and major cities, but a military dictatorship like Pakistan, like Egypt, I think is a very likely scenario. Even more recently, an Iranian economist did an interview with Deutsche Welle, and he mentioned a Bonaparte like dictatorship for Iran. So, and there are a number of people who could be considered for that position.
All right, we're reaching the end here. Alex, I'm going to ask you very briefly if you can touch on the IRGC point, and then Ahmed, I'm going to go to you to ask you the final round of questions. But Alex, can you give me your feedback on in your position on the IRGC as an actor that might be beneficial from this situation and might take over because of this crisis?
With all due respect to you, Oren, to Sina, to all of us, frankly, I think that's sort of missing the point. IRGC has been running Iran for some time now. So the idea that they're executioner in any ways, but they're also, the ones that are advising Khamenei in so many ways. So for me, the IRGC taking over is like, I would say you got to go back to 99 when the IRGC started taking over. That's when they started taking over. And by now, they've consolidated. There will be no Khamenei without IRGC. I mean, what is he going to do? Have the seminaries in Qom come out and do the cracking down or firing ballistic missiles in Israel? IRGC has been running around for some time. So the idea that they take over means nothing. There's basically continuity. There's only going to be a difference if IRGC, and that's really a big, tough one to imagine, they come out and say, you know what? IRGC, our name says Islamic Revolution Guards Corps. Remember, the word Iran doesn't appear anywhere in the title. They were never about Iran. They were about protecting the outcome of one revolution happening in 1979 at all costs. And if they come to the conclusion that maybe they should put the word Iran in that title and stop in the business of exporting the Islamist revolution of Ayatollah Khomeini and focus on what the Iranian protesters today want, a very different Iran, well, I can see a lot of these IRGC folks being able to maybe survive and be in that post-Khamenei state, but we're talking massive change in their outlook, in their priorities. It wouldn't be the IRGC we have today or have had for decades. So I don't know if IRGC as an institution is capable to pull it off, because they always had their legitimacy from being behind the clerics. Without that clerical support and cover, I mean, what justifies them? And I would say, last point, Iran doesn't have a history of military dictatorship. Right? This is not Pakistan where the military take over when the British leave and the military never left again, or Egypt. Or Iran doesn't really have a history of military dictatorship where the military themselves ruled over the country. So that's a big question mark. They could reform, they could try and find partners in the system to sort of integrate themselves into for the sake of surviving, but them taking over, continuing the policies they've been responsible for going forward, again, you can expect more rounds of protest. With Khamenei dead, IRGC alone has to go out and crush the protesters. So I don't see that as a viable solution, unless, as I said, the big if they agree to fundamentally reinvent themselves as an institution.
Ahmad, I want to touch, because we're in the final minutes, I want to touch on the kind of a potential scenario of external intervention. Because in the US, we just saw Trump basically announcing that he is basically calling the protesters to continue, that he's going to halt the negotiations with Iran. In Israel, people are also making all sort of suggestions that Israel should be helping and so on and so on. And there's a question here about the capitation of the leadership of the IRGC, if that's going to help the protest or not. Let me ask it in a very simple way. If there is an external intervention to assist the current protest wave in Iran, will that be beneficiary to the regime change in terms it will serve the purpose of those protests, or that's going to lead to actually to the rounding around the flag and will serve the regime? So in other words, if I'm a decision leader in the United States, maybe not in Israel, should I be taking an action and helping the protest actively with military force, or should I just stand back, help whenever I can with whatever influential campaigns or assistance in financially and so on, but do not take a direct hit on the regime? So where would you put that kind of a intervention as beneficial or not to the protests?
So I don't think if a foreign intervention, especially if it's in a kinetic form, it will be beneficial. Yes, maybe symbolically, if let's say the Beit Rahbar, Khamenei's office, Supreme Leader's office, is being targeted, or things in that nature, the headquarters of IRGC would be useful. But we should also consider that. There's a lot going on in diaspora inside Iran on regarding what the Western let's say intelligence agencies, Israel, America, CIA, what they are going to do, especially considering that they are highlighting the presence of Reza Pahlavi. I mean, they are highlighting him as an alternative. I think this would most likely backfire unless there's a more neutral and diverse reaction or a plan from the West, from Israel. We know that in Iran we have secular Republicans. They want a secular republic when the Islamic, because Islamic regime needs to go. It belongs to the dustbin of history. It doesn't represent the Iranian people, at least the current generation. Maybe 30, 40 years ago, it made sense. Now it doesn't make any sense. We have then reformists. Some believe that still reforms are viable. Their numbers are shrinking, but still there are those who believe in reform. We have secular Republicans. We have those who believe to the return of the monarchy, especially again in the Persian heartland. And then we have non-Persians. They are very much concerned with this type of manipulation. If the Persian chauvinism, if the Pahlavi dictatorship comes back, they most likely they are not going to react very well to that. And the something that needs to be avoided, a civil war situation, a chaos, I think that will ensue if the Pahlavi is returned.
So, last remarks. I'll start with you, Alex, just because I know you have a hard stop. We'll go to Sina and Ahmed just for conclusion. So, Alex, in short, last remarks. Are we going to see a regime change, a change regime, or same as always? What is your opinion and thoughts?
Oren, I've done so many of these rounds of protest. I'm sure we all have the last few, well, going back in my case, 99. So I wouldn't know. I can't tell you this is the last time. I hope for the sake of people of Iran, it is because they're tired. They're exhausted. They're being slaughtered. And nobody can deny that. Not even Ali Khamenei can deny that. So I don't know if it's going to be ending in the next few days. But a couple of things are obviously critical here. If the regime thinks it can contain, crush its way out of it, and things are going to be fine, that's just wishful thinking. The next round of protests are just around the corner for one simple truth. Khamenei, and I know he's pushed out this message that he's willing to talk to the Trump administration, he's buying time. He hasn't suggested that he's willing to really accept zero enrichment, which means the idea of a diplomatic resolution is hardly going to be happening, which means sanctions are going to stay. Trump's going to be in the White House for 3 more years. The Iranians now today have more reason to hate this regime with thousands of people dead than ever before. As I said, even if they survive this round, the next round is going to be there soon, and it's going to be probably bloodier. And then you have to ask the question, does this regime have the capacity to kill its way to the point where Khamenei dies? I don't know. That's a big question mark. But I do hope at some point the opposition on one hand over here, starts getting really its act together in terms of captivating the minds and hearts of Iranians in Iran who are already shouting the slogans of change. But give them a pathway, show them exactly how post-Khamenei Iran will look like, because that will keep the momentum. Again, it's easy for me to sit here on the other side of the world, talk about momentum when people are getting shot at, but this is for them. This is for their own future, and they're obviously willing to sacrifice. So if that happens, the momentum stays. Again, this is something the regime has never dealt with. Regime deals with protesters for a couple of days, couple of weeks, but you talking months over. This is when the regime starts feeling the pressure. It will probably start hollowing out. And then what if you have people leaving the regime? And again, that happens. This is very similar to what we've seen elsewhere in the region since post-Arab Spring. In the case of Syria, it took 3 or 4 months before the regime had a clear-cut split. In the case of Iran itself, back in the Green Opposition Movement 2009, a part of the regime started showing signs to wanted to leave the regime. Those are the types of things where suddenly Khamenei feels increasingly lonelier and lonelier, and it might just, the dam might burst. So I'm giving you some scenarios, but I've been doing this for long enough to know that predicting exactly what's going to happen in Iran with so many factors, both domestic and external, at play, it's very hard. But we can all agree Iran has never seen this before. This is a very new chapter. This is something Iranians have tended to associate with crackdowns in the Arab world, what Hafez Assad did in the 80s to his people in Syria and so on. But now this has come to Iran, and I think I'm pretty sure the Iranian people are not going to put up with it. Whether Khamenei thinks he's doing God's work or not doesn't matter. People of Iran showing all the signs that they're going to resist. They're going to stand up for their rights, and it seems to me they're now showing signs to want to fight in ways we haven't seen them do before. But let me stop there, Oren. Thank you for the opportunity. I'm sorry I have to leave a bit early.
Thank you, Alex. Sina, last question and final remarks, both incorporated in one. Do you see a potential of this regime agreeing to make a deal in which they do not hold the nuclear enrichment as part of it, and basically giving up on what you can say started this whole mess, the nuclear program? Do you see them kind of capitulating on that and essentially saying, regimes, the only thing to protect the regime, the only way to survival of the regime is actually giving up on the nuclear option? We should do that. Do you see them even going to that direction?
Not as long as Ayatollah Khamenei is alive. He had once told an Iranian ambassador that you can stop enrichment under 2 conditions. One, when I die, or if I resign. So he had agreed to zero enrichment under those two conditions, which are not going to happen. Iran might be open to a suspension in uranium enrichment as long as, let's say, Donald Trump is in the office. This way, Iranians can claim that they didn't give up on what they call their right to enrich uranium, and they give Donald Trump a political victory to claim that, while I am in the office, Iran cannot enrich. But I don't believe that they'll agree to it unless the U.S. is offering them a deal that they cannot reject. And this is something that has historical background. In 1970s, when the Shah was negotiating with the Americans to buy nuclear reactors, the U.S. approach was no plutonium reprocessing in Iran, and Iran's position was absolutely we want to have plutonium reprocessing. Ultimately, when the Iranians accepted the U.S. position, the Carter administration gave them the most favored nation status, which entitled to Iran the same treatment as France and Great Britain when it came to nuclear technology. But other than that, I don't believe that Iranians would agree to a permanent zero enrichment.
All right. Ahmed, final remarks, final comments in 30 seconds, if you can.
Okay, thank you, Oren, for being generous when it comes to me. But yes, I hate to disappoint you and the audience, but I don't think the regime collapse is imminent for various reasons. We don't see I should say that this is not maybe the end of the regime, but the beginning of the end of the regime. No doubt about that. But it's not imminent, the regime collapse. One, because we don't see any actually defections from the, let's say, the IRGC or any cracks in the machine of repression. Number two, the oil sector, we don't see any strikes, any movement similar to 1979, which was the oil sector strike was very important, or transportation, truck drivers, and things in that line. And also, we don't see a unifying leader. There's only a mythical savior, and that's not helpful. Yes, this gentleman is loved by most or some Persians, but hated by the non-Persians. And then we don't see organization, like a day after plan for running the country, or the transition period. And also the fragmentation in the opposition. This is the most important reason why the Islamic regime has survived so far. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Ahmed. And at this point, I want to thank both Yusina and Ahmed for joining us today. Alex left, but also I want to thank him as well. This has been a fascinating topic. This has been an evolving topic. It's on the go. There's news coming in as we speak. And I do apologize for the fact that we didn't have time. 3 speakers. The topic is massive. We're basically talking about the fact that the regime will survive or not in the protests and the opposition. So that topic is massive. So I apologize for many of our audience who sent us a lot of questions that we didn't go to just because of the lack of time. But definitely we will continue to cover this, and we'll probably have another webinar coming up in the upcoming weeks. On that note, I want to mention to everybody, this is part of a series of webinars that we conduct. There is one next week about Cuba, what we perceive to be the untold story of the Venezuela thing is the Cuban angle. So we're going to bring an expert to talk about Cuba. And we'll definitely do another one about Iran. So thank you, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Much appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you.